Hi, welcome to an introduction to Python. In this video, we'll talk about loops. We'll cover loops, for versus while. We'll talk about the range function, direct versus indirect loops, user input, continue versus break, and nested loops. So in general, a loop allows you to have a sequence of instructions execute repeatedly until some condition is met. Python's for loop let you iterate over items of a certain sequence. For example, later we'll talk about a list, a string, or a tuple, and then process them with some code. So the syntax is for x in sequence. So for every x in this sequence, do something with that x. And so in this video, because we haven't talked about sequences yet, we'll just do a simple version of a for loop, which allows us to specify a sequence of instruction a certain number of times. And we do that by using the range function. Okay, so range has different parameters. So one option is we specify one number, which is the stop number, and this will return a sequence of numbers from 0, which is the default value, up to, but not including stop. And then the increment is by 1. That's also the default value. And so let me give you an example here. So for x in range 10, for example, let's print out x. So this will go from x will take on numbers in the sequence from 0 to 9, again not including x. So if I do that, it prints out 0 up to 9. So the print function, since we print a lot, has an optional keyword argument n, which allows you to specify what to print at the end of whatever it is that you're printing. So for example, if I say n equal to a space, then it will separate everything I'm printing with spaces. So for example, if I run that, then it will print out 0 to 9, but now every time I print something, it will end with a space, etc. I can also do comma if I want, for example. And so this is the range function taking one argument. The range also can take multiple arguments. So if you send 2 arguments to the range function, then the first value is the start value, and the stop value is where you end but not including it. So again, it starts at start and it ends at the one right before stop, and the increment is also by 1 by default. If you specify 3 numbers, then start and stop, it's just as before, and the step tells you the increment. And so for example, for x in range from 2 to 10, print x. So this will print out from 2 to 9. Oops. This is equal to, so this is from 2 to 9. And then if I were to do a step, which is say for example 3, then that will go from 2 to 9, but by increment of 3. So 2, 5, 8, and so that's the step size. And we can also do, let's try another one. For x in range, I can also go backwards if I want, from 10 to 2, but increment of -1. So this will go backwards. So this starts at 10, go all the way down to 2, but not including it, so to 3, and increment of -1. A while loop executes a block of code while some condition is met. So while the condition is true, then perform some sequence of instructions. So for example, if to say x is equal to say 1, y x is less than 10, print x, and then x plus equal 1. So we're going to print all the number from 1 up to 10, not including 10, and increment by 1. So this will print out from 1 all the way up to 9. So this will keep running until this condition is false, then it will exit the block. A direct loop is one in which the number of iterations is known ahead of time. An indirect loop is one in which the number of times it executes is unknown. Typically we use the for loop for direct loops, and then the while loop for indirect loops. So we've seen direct loops already. Printing numbers from 1 to 10 is an example of a direct loop. We can calculate ahead of time how many times this is running, and so usually we use a for loop for that. And then so let's look at an example of where an indirect loop is used. So this occurs whenever we don't know how many times the loop is going to run. For example, if the code requires to ask the user for an input, then we don't know how long before they terminate. And so the function input accepts a string input from the user, and also accepts a string if you want to use it as a prompt, and then we can process that input. So as an example, if I say input print of x, then the input, actually for the input you can put in whatever. Oh, so I ran that twice. So I enter it, and then it'll show you what you enter. Then also in this case it prints it. So every time you enter something, it actually will display it. And turns out this is actually it's a string. And so if I want to enter numbers, I need to cast it into the appropriate type. So for example, if I were to say an int here, change it to an integer. So let's take out this print statement. Then if I enter 456, you know this is a string, it's going to convert into an integer and print out 456. So the input function also accepts a string as a parameter for prompting. So for example, I can say enter a positive integer, and run that. Then I'll say enter a positive integer. Then I can enter 45, and then x has the value of 45. So if I were to print x, oh actually again this has already been printed, because whenever you enter a number, it'll print the message and then whatever it is that you print. Okay, continue versus break. Continue is used to skip the current iteration and move to the next iteration in a loop, whereas break is used to exit a loop. So for example, suppose I have a for loop. So I have a for loop from say 1 to 10, 0 to 10, 0 to 9. If I is equal to 5, and I'll say continue, print out I. So this will go into the for loop, and I is going to go from 0 to 9. So if I is 5, then it will go into the if. If not, it will skip it. It will print out the number. It will keep doing this until I gets to 5. If I is 5, it will go into the if. And then it will continue means that it's going to go to the next iteration. Means that I is now 6. And I is 6, it will skip over this, and then print out 6. So basically prints out all the numbers from 0 to 9 except for the number 5. So I need another array. Oh, I forgot the in. So 0 to 9, not including the 5. Let's do another one. Let's do an example of a break. So let's say you have x is 1 and y(x) is less than 10. Print x. And then increase by 1. Then if x is 4, then break. So what this does is that x is 1. If x is less than 10, which it is, it goes in, prints it out, and then increase by 1. So keep doing this until x is 4. If x is 4, it'll break, meaning it break out of the while loop entirely. So whereas continue, go to the next iteration and continue the loop, break will exit the loop entirely. So if I were to run this, it'll print out 1, 2, 3, and when I get to 4, it'll break out of the entire loop. A nested loop is a loop that is inside of another loop. So we've done, so let's just print out the number again from say 1 to 10. 1 to 9, not including 10. So we know how to, so this just print, so I need the colon here. So this is a simple for loop. Range here, I forgot the end again. Okay, so this is going to print out from 1 to 9. Now, I want to convert this into, actually I'm going to write this, I'm not going to put an end there, so that this is going to print out in column. So suppose that I want to print out 1 to 9, but at every row I'm going to print out multiples of that number. So in other words, I'm going to print out the multiplication table from 1 to 9. So in the first row, I'm going to have multiple of 1. In the second row, I'm going to have multiples of 2, etc. So that means that I have a for loop here, and inside of that is going to be another for loop. So this is a nested loop. So for j in range, let's do from 1 to 11. So we're going to do multiples from 1 to 10. And then I'm going to print out now I times j. So this is the multiplication of I and j. And then I can separate with spaces. And then after every row, I'm going to print out nothing to kind of go to the next line. So if I were to run this, notice it'll print out multiples of 1 up to 10 multiple of 1s, multiples of 2, all the way up to multiples of 9. And if I want to format it nicely, I can put in here, for example, an escape sequence. So this is for a tab. I do that, then everything is nicely indented. So there we go. This is a loop inside another loop. Okay, this is, I think, the end of the lecture. Again, please go to my website and download this notebook. There's a lot of good exercises you can work on. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks.